Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar, The World Beyond Test Automation, AI-powered intelligent testing for modern applications. My name is Susie. I'm a member of the marketing team at Sauce Labs. Joining me today are two software industry leaders. They are bringing a wealth of expertise and experience to this conversation. I have with us my colleague, John Kelly, Chief Strategy Officer here at Sauce Labs. And also joining us today from Qualitest is Vikul Gupta. He's an Executive Vice President at Qualitest. So please do join me in welcoming Vikul and John for today's conversation about AI-powered intelligent testing for modern applications. With that, I will turn the floor over to Vikul.
Hey, thanks. Like Susie was saying, I'm with the Qualitest, and in my role, I'm responsible for all of next-gen COE capabilities, primarily focusing on Aiml, performance, security, AR, VR. And I've been in this industry for quite some time. Prior to Qualitest, I was with a large SI vendor where I was in a CTO role. And prior to that, I was with HP Software, where I was their worldwide CTO for DevOps. John?
Hi, thanks, Vikul, and thanks, Susie. Hi, John Kelly here, Chief Strategy Officer for Sauce. I was formerly CTO. Long career in software prior to Sauce Labs. I've only been in test for a few years, but I have run large engineering teams and large R&D teams at companies like Symantec and Neustar and other places. So I've always had QA as a part of my responsibility. So it's great now to be on this side of the fence and to be working to help development teams and QA teams to go faster. So with that, I'm going to jump into some of our conversation and acknowledge some of the pressures and some of the ways that testing is being pressured and changed as software development has gone faster and faster. Because I think fundamentally velocity or speed is the key theme in software development today, right? So Sauce Labs, for example, years ago, the folks who started Sauce actually wrote Selenium, which invented test automation for software development, which is great. But nowadays, Selenium, Appium, other test frameworks, while they're necessary, they're not sufficient. It's not enough just to automate your tests and think that that's going to be enough to go faster. More and more customers are going from maybe tens or dozens of releases per year to hundreds or thousands of releases per year. This release velocity increasing. It's absolutely astonishing. And over there to the left, you have the DORA metrics, the DevOps Research Association metrics, right? It's all about deployment frequency and lead time for changes and change failure rate and time to restore server. These are the things that push people. And what's super interesting about this is it's not just velocity, it's frequency and the way these two things play together. So if I am pushing hundreds or thousands of small changes through the system on a continuous basis and constantly flowing them into production, I can't simply stop and run a very large test suite on every one of those changes. I have to figure out how to be more efficient and more effective. And some of that is around using AI and ML to do smarter things with your test suite. Some of that is making sure that you're testing earlier in the pipeline and also later out in production. And this is part of what we talk about with test shifting left and test shifting right. But this means more personas. This means not just the QA and SDEV persona, but also the developer, and also potentially even a DevOps developer who's responsible for things in production. And this also spreads out the notion of test, such that it's not just about validation before you send it out into production, because all your risk used to be concentrated in that one moment before release. It's also about having safety nets in production. Feature flagging, A/B testing, error monitoring, journey monitoring, all types of things. And those all provide additional signals and additional tools for multiple personas who are all collectively responsible for quality. And we are seeing, this is actually interesting as well, we're seeing different models emerge across the industry. We talk to a lot of customers, big and small, And it used to be, of course, that you had a centralized QA team and they were the only ones responsible for quality. Now we're seeing those QA teams sometimes still existing in that way, but often we're seeing them broken up and maybe being embedded into dev teams. Maybe they're becoming a center of excellence responsible for, process and for tooling. Maybe they are becoming coaches to the development teams, right? Or maybe there's a lot more outsourcing of the quality problem to folks like Qualitest who can come in and bring that industry experience across hundreds of customers to bear on your one problem that you might have. So there's a variety of models emerging. There's many more testing frameworks, many more tools, et cetera. So testing is not as straightforward as it was even just a few years ago. Of course, the flip side to all that is that this brings about many, many, many more tools. And all of those signals off of those tools are isolated. So your static code analysis and your UI test and your error report in production theoretically should all talk to each other. They should all relate back to each other, right? Such that if you find an error in production, you can bring that back and relate it to the static code analysis, that you did earlier on, and you can use that to say, okay, I know where it is in the code, and I can find it, and I can fix it quickly, and now I can use that to improve my test coverage. These are all things that are sort of intuitively obvious, but actually super hard. And that's part of what Vikul and I want to talk to you about today, is how to bring AI, ML, and just frankly experience, right, to these types of problems, because it's, again, not as straightforward and simple as, hey, just write a bunch of Selenium scripts and you're done. So again, this kind of spaghetti that's happening across the entire tool chain or SDLC, however you want to think about it. Vikul,
Yeah,
can you talk to us about your perspective on the challenges and perceptions?
Yeah, before I talk about challenges, let's talk about what's happening out there, right? With COVID, the need to digitize, the need to be digital has increased. And because of that, right, we're seeing more and more companies embracing ways to directly interact with the users. And if users are in play, you need to release faster. You need to engage the users in a way where the experience is right. Now, if you need to release faster, you need to develop faster, you need to build faster, you need to test faster, you need to deploy faster, and then you need to change faster because things are continuous in nature. Now, what is important? Speed, agility, without compromising quality is important. So when I go and talk to C-level, many times, right, the reason they want to talk to me is, you could help me because my QA is slow. My dev to QA ratio is skewed. I feel I'm spending too much and I'm putting too much of an effort and I'm putting too much of dollars against QA. And for many senior executives, it's not about cost. It's not about too much. It's about how fast. For them, QA is a bottleneck. So that's the business view, the C-level view. But then when I go talk to fellow QA engineers, quality engineers, John, next slide, please. They have their own problem. They're not blind to these perceptions. They're not blind. They are very well aware that business would want them to test faster. Business would want them to test in a way where there's no defect leakage. Business would want them to be agile in a true sense in the testing things. And with everything going on, they're like, things are changing so fast. Should I just do manual testing or should I automate? So they are in that whole thing about to automate or not to automate. And then add on top, you have this tool, you have that tool, you have Sauce Lab and you have open source and you have something else. What to use? How do you make that selection? How do you make sure that what you're investing in is built for future? How do you make sure that, like John was saying, like you have so many signals coming in. How do you make sense of it? How do you derive and analyze insights from it? Another thing which is a very common problem is I have large test sets. I've automated them, but based on our movement from 6 months to 6 weeks, 6 weeks to weekly to daily release cycles, I just don't have the time to run all my test sets, automated or not automated. And then you add on top multi-speed IT. Some are on waterfall, some are on iterative, some are on agile. What to use where? And then one thing which I'm seeing, John talked about it, right? The changing face of quality. Next slide, please. I think that will probably set me up for. So I spent 14 years doing hardcore development. You talk about Corba, EJB, hardcore networking. And then I moved to quality engineering. And the moment DevOps came, they were like, look, it's dev in ops. There is no QA. So QA is dead. But here's the fun part. Think of your kids. They download an application, they try to use it, doesn't work. What do? Delete. In the digital world, quality is not an option. Quality is all the more important. You have a large insurance company 4 years back. They had an issue and 65,000 customers were lost every day because they were not getting signed. Ask him, is quality important? Yes. Now, most of the C-levels I work with, they have one of these initiatives. Either they have DevOps or DevSecOps. I'm working with a large healthcare provider where the CIO has kind of come up with this whole shift left initiative. Why shift left? Because he wants the dev to shift left, QA to shift left, ops to shift left, so that they can be more agile. They can find issues faster. They can release faster. Zero rework, first time right. These were some initiatives I've worked on in the last 3-4 years with different C-levels, where again, what is common is zero rework, which means find issues where your rework is as minimum as possible. First time right. Build code in a way where quality is engineered so that you don't find defects, you prevent defects. So these are some of the initiatives, right? If you think of your organization, I'm sure it's one of these or a different version of these initiatives. What is important is you talk about shift left, you talk about DevOps, you talk about zero rework, you talk about first time right. What is the most critical piece of it? It's not just dev, it's not just ops, it's not just infra, it's the quality. Quality is important. Next slide, please. Yeah. Now, how are we going to shift left? How are we going to solve that problem that we move from 6 months to 6 weeks to 6 days to daily cycles? I have automated test cases, but I just don't get the time to execute them. There, the answer is not just plain automation. It's beyond automation. We have to be smarter. I have another common concern I hear. No one has unlimited budget. Vikul, I have $50,000 and I have only 20% automation. What do I do? There also, you could use things beyond automation, where you could use AI ML to help identify what is changing in this release identify what test cases, what classes are impacted, and then only automate that. So it's not about how much, it's about what to automate, when to automate.
Hey, Vikul, could I throw a comment in there? We've been having a lot of conversation with customers about efficiency versus effectiveness. And it's a really interesting distinction that's really powerful when you think about it. So on the one hand, you want to be more efficient with your tests. You want them to go faster, right? So people write them better, more and more atomic tests rather than large monolithic tests, breaking them up into not just a functional test, but maybe recognizing that actually you should have had a visual test here and an API test there and a functional test there, and you would have been more effective, right? I'm sorry, more efficient. But then there's also effectiveness, and effectiveness could be breaking up the test in certain respects, but it's also about knowing which tests are the most necessary for the change that's required here. Because in fact, for every single change you make, you might have a large suite of tests, but 90% of the value is going to come from 10% of the tests. And that's a hard thing to solve. So Sauce is pretty good actually helping with the first part, because we do have failure analysis and we have a lot of analytics on your tests, and we can actually watch your tests and see inefficient requests. And we're working on some features to give you suggestions on how to fix that and all that. But the second part, frankly, I think you have more experience than we do in terms of identifying which tests should run on a given change. And if you could talk, maybe tell us a little bit about how you do that.
Correct. So I think one important distinction I kind of explain to our customers is when you think about continuous testing, when you think about your pipelines, a traditional pipeline would say, design your test, automate your test, and then create your test sets, and then test execution. The moment you talk about continuous testing and intelligent testing, we also introduced this whole concept of smart test optimization. Traditional test optimization techniques were primarily centered around strategies which involved risk-based optimization, or include all the tests which failed last time, or things like those. And one large banking financial customer said, there has to be science. How come there's no science? Who defines the risk? SMEs. That's it, right? There has to be a smarter way. So there are plenty of ways to do test optimization now. Looking at a user story, you could extract an intent out of it using Aiml and NLP. So this user story which is coming in is for logging. This is for authentication. This is for monitoring. This is for ad user. Okay, if this is the intent of an incoming user story, let's go extract the intent from our test cases, whether they're manual or whether they're automated. In the end, it's all English language. So I extract the intent from both, and then I try to match. So this is one way to do it. Second is, you look at defect prediction techniques. For an incoming user story, using AML, you could predict what kind of defects could come in. I'll give you an example. One of the customers we built this AIML bot for, the first defect it predicted was for an incoming user story where they were trying to do LDAP implementation. The bot predicted that this would be a defect. And when we went and tried to find out why would this be a defect, we found out in the last 4 builds, every time, or in the last 4 releases or multiple different products done by the same team, whenever they thought about LDAP, they thought about Open LDAP, but they always forgot about Microsoft LDAP. And because of that, a bug would always come. So based on incoming user stories, you could predict what kind of defects will come in, what kind of test cases will fail. And that could be one test optimization technique. Another could be based on file changes. Very simple. You look at that whenever these 3 files are modified together or not modified together, this text will fail. So indirectly, you're looking at file dependency to find out whether any functionality will break. AI/ML works on symptoms. If you understand the symptoms and you know what has happened in the past, you could predict. So that's one aspect. Another one, which John, I think you were alluding to, change impact-based testing. This is a very, very powerful test optimization technique. And if I have to simplify it, all we do is, let's say you have 10,000 test cases, you have 1 million lines of code. We ask the customer to run all their test cases, all 10,000 the first time. And as they're running it using a non-intrusive instrumentation, we identify when you run test case 1, what classes and methods got changed. When you ran test case 600, what classes and method got changed. So we build the table. Now imagine, what do we have? We have test case to class and method mapping. Now build number n+1 comes. The first thing we do is we do a build compare and we find what classes and methods have changed between the two builds. And when we know these classes and methods have changed between the two builds, we go back to that table and we say, okay, if these are the classes and methods which have changed, tell us the impacted test cases. Looks simple, but I think this is probably the most impactful. In multiple customers where we have implemented this capability, we've seen more than 80% optimized test cases. So imagine, right? Like if you have 800 test cases, you get to run only 20% of that and you're done. Now you don't have to worry whether it's 1 day release cycle, 1 week release cycle, or 6 weeks release cycle.
Right.
You
That's really powerful, Vikul, because when you think about, I love all these examples, and they're the kind of examples that only come from your breadth of experience. But one of the things that reminds me of is, if you want to keep continuous software flowing, and you want to have all these small changes flowing through the system, you can't afford to let one change flow through the system too slow, because it gets stale and other changes are made to the code base elsewhere with these broad CI systems, right, that are trying to do these merges all the time. And you might actually cause more problems in the long run by slowing down the train for that one change than you would have if you just let it go into production. So getting more efficient and more effective with the types of techniques you're talking about to keep each piece moving along at its proper speed is actually safer than slowing things down.
Correct. So let's move on to the next slide,
Yeah.
John. I think this is where, so this happened 3 months back. I was telling John. So I have this customer where they have the shift left initiative. And I went and talked to him. He's like, Vikul, don't come and tell me that I have to be QE now or DE now from a QA standpoint. I get it. Every vendor comes and tells me that quality engineering, SDET is the new world. I get it, but how? We have a shift left initiative at a CIO level. What do I need to shift left? And shift left from where? From where to where? So we created this representation. If you look at it at a high level, requirements, design, development, test design, test automation, the test data management, test execution, and your defect identification, whether waterfall, whether DevOps, at a high level, this represents key milestones. Today, what do? We define test cases, we execute test cases, and we find defects. What are these defects for? These defects are representative of requirement issues, design issues, functional issues, security issues, or performance issues. So before I go into more details, right? Like, I also would like to explain this whole term of quality engineering. And a common thing which is said is quality need not be assured, it needs to be engineered. What does that mean? It needs to be engineered. By whom? So the need for quality has not gone away. Who does quality, at what step, and how it is done has transformed in the digital world. Quality is important from the get-go. So think requirements. When the requirements are coming in, there are plenty of tools for doing requirement management. You could use Jira, you could use version 1, you could use anything out there, open source, third party. But what do they allow you to do? They allow you to capture requirements and manage requirements, but they don't tell you whether the requirement is right or wrong, whether the requirement has been defined in the right way or not. And what are requirement defects? Requirement defects are when you have a requirement defined which is ambiguous. You have a requirement which is defined which is incomplete, or it is conflicting. Log into saucelab.com and put in the username and make sure the password is right. What is right? That's an ambiguous requirement. So people who are in the agile world, they will probably relate to this. A typical user story has to have a structure. You have to have a persona, action, and outcome. As a database admin, I want to split the database to make it available for application ABC. I was working for a large beverage company, very, very mature. They had taken on the agile journey probably 4 years back. We go in and we said, we kind of explained this concept, and they're like, okay, come in. So we had this requirement validation bot. We took 2 of their products and we ran this bot for 2 sprints, and we found out that only 30% of the user stories were defined right. What does that mean? It means that either the persona was missing, or action was missing, or outcome was missing. Now, if a user story said, as a database admin, I want to split the database, the developer might think it is being split for something, and the tester might think it is being split for something else. The way they code and the way they write the test cases, there's a mismatch. And when do they find out? The last phase, when you run your test case and you identify a defect. What is shift left? The moment a user story is defined, a bot wakes up. It runs it across that single user stories or millions or hundreds of user stories and tells them what is high quality user story, medium quality user story, and low quality user story. So that's shifting left. We are not finding an issue, we are preventing an issue. Next. Click. So this was just a visual representation. John, you could probably keep on clicking. Similarly, right? Design defects. Amazon has a library called Code Guru. We use that to kind of look at the design constructs to see if the way it has been designed, would it be scalable in Amazon or not, or Azure or not. So rather than waiting for issues to show up as performance defects, design defects because something did not scale up, we are proactively looking at the right stage. So testing is not happening in the QA phase. Quality is being engineered and validated at every step of the cycle. Similarly, when we talk about risk-based testing, again, works, but how can we make it better? If you give me last 2 years worth of data, 8 years worth of data, where you give me the test cases, the user stories, and the risk assigned to it, you don't need an SME. Your reliance on SME is less. Now a machine, an AI algorithm could predict what should be the risk categorization of a test case. There are plenty of tools out there in the market which enable scriptless automation, in-sprint automation. And most of them use one or the other form of AI/ML. And why is that important? That is important because, again, 3 weeks back, I was with a customer and we were doing the assessment on what is the maturity level. And they're like, we have 70% automation. Amazing. John talked about metrics. Now, if you just look at 70% automation, it's amazing. But then I was like, what is the automation leverage? Less than 15%. I'm like, why? Well, because it's costly for me to maintain my automation scripts And we don't have that much time. And objects are changing, screens are changing, object property is changing. So it's just easier for me to do manual testing. Scriptless helps you solve that problem because it has self-healing capabilities.
Yeah. But Vikul, it's interesting because we went out and bought Autonomic, a great scriptless automation product a while back. And what we're finding with our customers is that you need to use the right tool for the right job, right? So these scriptless products, there's a lot of them on the market, and we think we bought a really good one, of course. They're wonderful at, let's say, limited tasks. Let's say, for example, you're doing Salesforce workflows, ServiceNow workflows, things where it's sort of a walled garden where the AI ML can understand it really well ahead of time, and you can write natural language and describe business processes, et cetera. And it also works pretty well for low-code platforms. Let's say you're doing, Uncork or OutSystems or whatever. It works really well for those as well. And we actually have, some partnerships with some of those companies. That's great. But if you have a massive custom application, let's say you're a major bank and you've got, hundreds of applications maybe even, and they're really, really, really complicated and they're custom built, it still seems like you need a broad tool chain of the types of tools we were talking about earlier to solve those problems. And I think it's important for people to realize AI ML doesn't solve all your problems. AI ML takes what you were doing before and automates some of it and optimizes a lot of it, but it doesn't really change ultimately the job to be done, right? It's kind of, and so the right tool for the right problem.
AI ML is like Java. Java doesn't replace tools. So in this case, all AI ML does is sit on top of your existing automation platform or set of tools from that perspective, in this case, Sauce Lab.
Yeah.
Use the data and enhance the intelligence of those platforms. Yeah. I have had so many customers come to me and tell me, oh, because we had these capabilities on top, the insights on top of either Sauce Lab or any other product, we see the value of the product kind of be 10 times more than just it being standalone. Now, a lot of vendors, including Sauce Lab, have done a fantastic job of incorporating AIML, but not everything should be part of the platform. Things have to be outside because John and I were discussing, like in the end, if you have all these bots, what is the end goal? The end goal is you have an end-to-end traceability. This requirement to this code to this test case to this defect, and this defect to this customer feedback.
Yeah.
When John and I were discussing about shift left, he's like, Vikul, but what about shift right? Don't we need to shift right too? In fact, I was having a conversation with Forrester analyst, and he's like, how do you test unknown? I was like, what does that mean? He's like, not everything is in requirements. You design it for some way and you give it to the young generation. The way they use it is very different. So how do you capture that? And this was a real issue. And one of our customers, a large food and beverage company, they engaged us. And what we did was we looked at their production environment. We looked at their Splunk logs. We looked at anything which we can extract from the production environment to identify the customer journey. They went to abc.com. From there, they clicked on here, they clicked on here, they clicked on there. And we mapped and created that journey. Where else is that journey? It's in your test cases. It's in your requirement designs. And why is this important? This is important because this became such a wonderful tool for the product managers to understand how they design versus how is it being used. And this became an input for them to prioritize their backlog and identify features which they need to enhance. It also became an input from a user experience perspective. You all understand 3-click paradigm, right? They all assume that it will be abc.com and then they will click on menu, and from menu they will go to offers, and from offers they will select and add it to. But now one of the things we found out was they were not going to abc.com. Because of all the email promotions they were doing, they were directly going 2 steps ahead. What does it do from a user experience perspective? So that became an important input for them. And from a testing standpoint, of course, it helped us identify, do we have all the customer journeys captured in our, and you will be surprised, we claimed we had 100% coverage, we didn't. We were touching 100% of the code, but we didn't have each and every scenario because those scenarios were not even thought of. I was giving another example, Bank of America. They came up with this mobile check deposit. And my son turned 18, I opened a bank account and I will submit a check and that's it, done. I move out. He goes, clicks on done, and immediately he goes back to the account to check his balance. From a customer experience perspective, won't it be awesome? Below done, you also show him what his balance is. So that became an input. So this is just examples, right? Like how QA, the insights you can derive from what we are trying to do in QA, especially as we're shifting left, as we're shifting right, are going to be so critical. That's why they've coined this new term called dev test ops, because without test, without QA, the success of DevOps is kind of iffy.
No, Vikul, I like your example of what your son did and how you think that you should improve the customer experience now by by putting the balance below. I think part of what we're going to get out of Shift Right is the opportunity for QA and QE teams to not, and dev test ops teams, to not just make sure it works, but to actually improve it, right? You want to get into the point where it's actually fast iteration loops effectively with your customers through the behavioral data, right? Where the product actually gets better than it started out because of the QA process.
Correct. John, it's interesting you talk about ops. Working for a large telecom provider, one of our customers, they had incidents coming in, and they were only 5 SMEs. And Friday, Saturday, Sunday, the amount of bugs which were coming in, they were able to dedicate just 3 days to take care of only P1s. So the backlog of a lot of unresolved effects was increasing, and then the reliance on SME was increasing. So guess who they came to for help? The QA team. We were the QA team there, and the reason they came to us was, apart from the triaging team, who knows how things break and how things will pass.
Yeah.
It was QA. So what we did was we created a triage bot for them using Aiml. So the process was, ServiceNow is where the incident came in. From there, it would get sucked into HPLM. And in HPLM, they had this whole defect management screen where they had all the details plus root cause and the status of a defect. So it would normally take 72 hours to resolve an incident. But with us, when we built that bot, it took 32 milliseconds.
Wow.
So this is QA building. So what did we use as input to the AI model? We use test cases, past defects, your QCID, Q description, past defect resolutions, and that became the knowledge. That's the knowledge an SME has. We just took that knowledge from what was in the data, codified it, and now those 5 people, they are able to solve all the incidents which come in a week within those 3 days. So again, shifting right in this case, which is very non-traditional, but this was a good example there. Let's go to the next slide, please.
All right, hold on a second. Let me finish the build here.
Yeah.
All right, so we've talked a lot about speed, velocity, right? And it's amazing. There are customers, even like AWS, that literally are doing thousands of deployments per day. Now, I know that they're more than just a web app, right? And they're more than just a mobile app, and hardly anybody's doing that kind of velocity. But the point is that that's a kind of nirvana, right? That the customers are trying to get to absolute continuity, and they want to make sure that hundreds or even thousands of individual developers or even teams can work independently from each other and not have dependencies, right? And this, of course, is the goal of CI and microservices and all of the modern software processes. But again, with that comes the problem of what happens when you put it all together and then try to ship it, right? It puts more and more pressure on the kind of testing that happens just before deploy. And it puts a lot of pressure on what's actually happening in production. And the trick for smarter DevOps, as Vikul, I think, was just alluding to as well, is being able to take the signals from all of this various tooling from the beginning of the code's inception through the test, through all the way into production, all of that, whether it's Splunk logs, whether it's journeys, whether it's segment data, whether it's unit tests, whether it's static code analysis, whether it's functional, all of these things. We know intuitively that if you could connect all the dots, you would have a really strong, continuous risk visibility into every single code change as it goes through its life cycle. Now that's hard to do, but that's what's being demanded as customers want to go at this astonishing speed, because really speed, velocity, that's it. That's all anybody cares about. But of course, if you go super fast and you crash, that's not so safe, right? So we need to, you want to go fast, but with high confidence, right? So it's interesting that, you know, not everybody's going to take the approach that this particular bank is taking, but this, I love this quotation that some customers are actually going so far as to take out quality gates altogether and just say, you know what, everything's going to go to production. Now, what does that do? That puts pressure now on the development team and the QA team or whoever is responsible for quality, right? Depending on what model you have, it puts pressure on the teams because what they have to do is first measure their quality. That's important as a baseline. And then prove to their management that they're always getting better. That's the new requirement for this particular company, right? That's a fascinating flip. It's no longer therefore about test coverage. You can't just go to your management and say, look, I got this great test coverage. And management will say, I don't care about your test coverage. I care about the fact that we had 3 P1 production incidents last week. That's all I care about. And I care that my mean time to resolution is really, really slow, right? Fix it, make it better. As long as you can show me continuous improvement, we're good. Take out the quality gates. The flip side is there are other customers who are actually saying, I want more quality gates because I have more testing tools and I can automate those gates. So I actually want more gates. That is also a valid approach. It's a different approach, but it's a valid one, right? And it's one that also enables you to make sure that you are doing many types of tests on the code as it goes through, which gives you those signals, that data, which we can then use through AI ML to create that ever improving process. So there are these different approaches, and but both of them require lots and lots of metrics, lots and lots of data, which of course will allow you to get self-improving. So these are really interesting approaches that customers are taking to create this velocity. And again, certainly the Sauce Labs approach has been to say more tools for more personas, and then make sure you're using the right tool at the right time, helping customers to take their monolithic tests that might be long running, break them up into the appropriate types of tests, get different kinds of capabilities all throughout the software development lifecycle. And then in the kinds of ways Vikul was talking about, tie that data together, right? Give you those analytics. So for example, you know, at Sauce, we don't have all of these capabilities, but we have most of them. We now have some UI unit testing, visual testing, API testing, live testing, browser testing. We're working on a security project. We have error monitoring. We're working on journey monitoring. We have some risk analytics. You know, we are increasing this. And by the way, over time, we'll add more capabilities that aren't on this screen yet as software development evolves and changes over time, because it's all about velocity. And the expectations today, 2 years from now, that won't be good enough. Customers will want to go even faster, right? And we know that new tools and new processes will emerge over time for that. Vikul, let's talk a little bit about your approach to some of these problems.
Yeah, so this was something I put together for a customer who articulated her problem in this way. She's like, I think I'm doing too much testing. And in spite of me doing too much testing, I still have defects leaking into production. So I'm getting questioned by the business. And because I'm doing too much testing, because defects are coming in, everything is slowing down. So there is a perception that we're not agile enough, we're not nimble enough. So there, I prescribe the 3I approach: intelligent optimization to optimize testing, integrated coverage to ensure that you have less probability of defect leakage, and in-sprint agility to address the speed issue. Right? This is where your scriptless automation, in-sprint automation, your customer journey maps, test what is needed would come into picture. I talked about when we talk about the intelligent optimization, this is the test optimization thing, which I had talked about. Different levers. You can use one, you can use all, or you can use 2 or 3 of them. Risk-based test optimization, where an Aiml algorithm helps the SME kind of categorize the right risk, helps define what is high, medium, low. Intent-based optimization I talked about, where you have an incoming user story and you extract the intent of it, and then you look at the test case, extract the intent of it, and then do a match. Failure-based test prediction. So this is where I talked about for incoming user stories or incoming code, you predict what kind of defects will happen. And based on that, so if you know this defect is going to happen and this test case is going to fail, then you ensure that that's part of your optimization strategy. And the last part is change impact-based testing. If only 10% of your code is changing, why do you need to run all your test cases? Isn't there a smarter way? And this is where I talked about classes and methods and test case mapping. And then I think intelligent coverage analysis, this is kind of a little bit tough because for different aspects of testing, whether you're doing unit testing, whether you're doing build, smoke testing, functional testing, integration testing, API testing, how do you know when you say I have 80% coverage or I have 100% coverage or I have 95% coverage? Out of that 95%, what part came from unit test? What part came from API test? What part came from build? Because even if you have not covered them in functional, but you have covered them in unit test or you've covered them in something, you're still okay. So that whole intelligent coverage analysis, think of microservices, right? Like coverage analysis by individual microservice. So the ability to, so imagine where you have a screen which says 82% coverage, you click on it, and then it dissects that 82%. Out of this 82%, 60% came because of regression or functional or unit or whatever. So you know where are your holes. If let's say you can't influence 100% unit test automation, then probably you will focus on the API side or function side. Or if there is an opportunity for you to fix the unit test because you have automated way of auto creating unit tests, depending on the technology you have or the programming language you're working in, then you know that 85 to 90%, 90 to 95%, which lever you have to touch. So that's about integrated coverage. So first of all, we'll optimize what you test, and then we'll ensure you that you have the right coverage. Your defects are not going to come in areas where you have complete coverage. And then we talk about in-sprint agility. This is where we talked about scriptless automation. How do you speed up testing? So I talked about auto triaging, root cause analysis. Now, they don't just happen in production, they also happen during testing. And many times the incidents you get might not be defects, might be a data issue. So would it be amazing if something fails, a test case fails, that becomes an incident, and the bot automatically tells you, you know what, you're in the wrong environment. Or you know what, your TIMS has an issue. Or something else, there's a configuration issue. It's all about how do you speed things up. Customer journey maps would probably assist you from understanding how the user is testing and then how it can be used. So at a high level, this is kind of a broad 3I approach I use. The levers will change depending on what customer pain point is. I wanted to share this with you so that in case this is helpful, feel free to use it. It helps communicate the pain point and the solution in a very simple to consume visual way. So I've seen head nods, I've seen senior executives really are like, okay, yeah, this relates to what our perception was. Remember the 3 perceptions? It was about cost, it was about quality, and it was about speed. So it helps address all 3 in one shot. Next slide, please, John. So one more click. Okay. So testers, they're not extinct. The scope of quality has evolved. It's less about quality assurance. It's more about engineering quality. That's why quality engineering. As the world goes digital, quality is going to be all the more important. Think your son, your daughter, they don't like something, they'll delete. There is no second chance. And same is true for large organization, whether it is banking, whether it is insurance, whether it is retail, whether it is healthcare, whether it is life sciences, whether it is travel and hospitality. If you go to kayak.com and it doesn't work, you go to something else. So this generation is very non-forgiving. So quality is very, very important. And cost of compromises in quality is not just the amount you spent on QA. It is about cost of losing customers, cost of losing market, cost of customer. So the cost word in digital has a total different meaning. I think I talked about the expectations, the scope of QA and QE. Shift left and shift right are real. I hope after today's presentation, you exactly know what are you shifting left from and what are you shifting right to. And if in your organization they're talking about DevOps, don't feel left out. Feel that, identify where, now you know why you are important in DevOps. Because I had a customer who said, I have a pipeline, everything works fine till we reach testing, and everything is at a pause because a lot has to be manual, a lot, even the automated is not integrated. But now with whatever we talked about today, whether it is scriptless automation, whether it is about using Aiml, whether it was using different tool chains which are integrated, like John talked about from a Sauce perspective, quality is a first-class citizen in DevOps. That's why just search this term, DevTestOps. This was coined by Forrester. I've actually spent a lot of time with Diego, who's consulted with a lot of large organizations, vendor organizations, kind of explaining why testing is important for success of DevOps. So with that, let's see, Susie, if we have any questions or any pending questions which have already been captured in the chat and not answered.
Great.
There are a
Thank
couple
you
of
so
questions.
much.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I see, John, you're in there already. And I just want to say before we jump in, just thank you both for that really excellent presentation, for sharing those stories and examples. I think there's a lot of really useful information to hear how others are finding success, common challenges, all of that. So thank you. We do have a few minutes left for today's webinar. If you do have questions for John or Vikul, please do continue to share those in the Q&A. But to jump right in, and John, I saw you paying some attention
very
here.
Quickly, so we leave time for other questions as well, because I think I can do these quickly. Question was, what about the quality gates in CI/CD platforms, releasing and production? It's such a great question, right? Test has traditionally been right between integration and deploy, right? And so we of course have integrations with, some of the existing CI products. We're working on smarter integrations because most of those folks are now enabling sort of bi-directional conversation between our products and their products. At a very high level, customers tell us, we don't want you, Sauce, to do test orchestration. We want our CI and our CD products to do the orchestration. So please integrate well with those. So our current focus is on just constantly improving integrations with the existing CI and CD platforms. The second real quick question, do we have any tools like SonarQube to help in quality gates and CI CD? No, we are working on some security, a DAST product in security. I would say even a project. I wouldn't even call it a product. But no, we don't have anything like SonarQube today. I want to now concede the rest of the time to further questions. Go ahead.
Yeah, so I think tools is just one aspect, right? You could use open source tools, you could use vendor tools, you could use Sauce Lab, but what is important is, can Sauce Lab consume the output of another tool to kind of decide on where the flow is? Let's say if it is a CI/CD pipeline and Jenkins is the orchestrator, you could define quality gates like technical debt, cyclomatic complexity. You could come up with 100 different things, your pass fail ratio for the test cases or defects or so on. And if your question is, what about quality gates? Quality gates are an important pillar of engineering quality. And one of the things what is important is not just defining them, but adhering to them. I've seen so many organizations define technical debt, but then ignore technical debt, which means you're feeding crappy code to the quality guys and then complaining that they're raising defects and slowing everything down. So quality has to be engineered, not assured. That's why quality gates are important.
Yeah, agreed.
Thanks for that addition. We did have one other question. Someone else talking about integrations that was pre-submitted for the webinar today, asking about whether there's any integrations with code coverage tools to leverage change-based test coverage metrics, asking also about using this to predict the risk associated with release. And I think that last piece of that, predicting the risk associated with release, was really in line with a lot of what we were talking about today. Would love to hear your thoughts on that.
Let me give a quick answer because I think Vikul has a probably longer, better answer. From the Sauce Labs point of view, our existing code coverage integration is with our backtrace error monitoring product. So if you have instrumented your app in production, we can also relate that back to your code coverage analysis. And so we can see that correlation, which means if you find an error in production, we can quickly point it back to the likely place in the code where the issue comes from. We have internally, to the second question about predicting, we have internally some great AI/ML projects which literally do that. They take your existing test failures and use that to relate back to the code base to predict when you make a new change, the likelihood of that also turning into a test failure, right? But we are not ready with that for production yet. Vikul, I think you have actually more sophisticated approaches to some of these problems because of the breadth of capabilities you have in AI/ML.
Correct. I think I spoke about some of them, right? Where we do change impact-based testing, where we look at what has changed to decide what to test. So, Susie, can you repeat the question? I was focusing on John's answer. I totally forgot the question itself. Can you repeat the last part of the question, please?
Yeah, just briefly, since I know we're at the top of our hour, but we'll give this a little more attention. The question was asking about integrations with code coverage tools to leverage change-based test coverage metrics and predict the risk associated with release.
Yeah. Okay. I think then what John answered and what I answered on top is right on target there. There are AI algorithms being built. In fact, we probably will be releasing something in the next quarter where, so think of different metrics. You have code coverage, you have technical debt, you have test failures, you have DAS results. Now imagine if you are the release manager, how do you make a determination whether it is okay to move from dev to QA, to staging to pre-prod and pre-prod to, how do you determine that? So what we're looking at is, right, coming up with something called your application quality index, right? Rather than 20 different things, is there a way you can feed all of these with some weightage and it gives you one number? If it's higher than 5, go. If it's lower than 5, stay. So again, this technique will work in mature customers where a lot of these metrics exist. Where it doesn't, we'll have to look at individual levers. Some John talks about whether we use backtrace, some which I talked about where we use this whole test case to code analysis to understand, right, like what is being covered. And then if there is no test case for that particular code which is changing, then the risk profile of the application automatically goes up.
All right.
Okay.
Well, thank you. Yes, thank you both for those responses. I know we're out of time for today, so I think we'll have to wrap up this conversation here, but really look forward to continuing this discussion with our attendees, with viewers of this webinar. There's a lot of important components of what was talked about here around, where are we going with test automation in order to deliver your modern applications faster with confidence, right? There's a lot that is happening here. And I, for one, really appreciate this conversation, John and Vikul, that you're having. I think it really highlights the power and the benefit of the partnership between Sauce Labs and Qualitest and the tooling and expertise that are being brought together here. So thank you both for bringing that to today's conversation. And of course, huge thank you to our attendees for tuning in and for your questions. So with that, on behalf of Sauce Labs and Qualitest, thank you very much for tuning in, and I hope everyone has a wonderful rest of their day.